Good morning, Metalheads here now. Welcome to a new episode on the Metal Meltdown, and today we're looking at the debut album from Waste of Space Orchestra entitled Syntheosis. Waste of Space Orchestra is actually a band with the combined efforts of two other bands, Oranzi Pazuzu and Dark Buddha Rising. Neither of which I'm particularly that familiar. They're in the psychedelic and drone world, and I'm not as familiar with those worlds as I would like to be. I do know enough of these bands, however, to tell you that individually they're both very weird, very funky, and very, very talented people. Which is why, even with that limited knowledge in mind, I was very excited to hear about this collaboration, Waste of Space Orchestra, especially considering that the band debuted it at Roadburn Festival, I think last year, to almost critical acclaim. So successful that Grimgent.com goes on to say here, it was a mind-blowing audiovisual spectacle that assaulted all your senses at once. Now, unfortunately, if you were not at that Roadburn Festival, you're probably never going to see this mind-bending spectacle. A shame, and it honestly makes me wonder why the band didn't consider doing a live DVD. But that does not mean that we don't get a dose of Waste of Space Orchestra, as the band basically took their entire show into the studio with them and condensed it into this incredible piece of psychedelic nonsense. Like, I have no idea how this would pair with some kind of visual accompaniment or whatever Waste of Space Orchestra was actually doing on stage, but I can tell you that audibly, as the album stands by itself, it's quite a showstopper. It's a meticulously crafted record with influences spanning the entire spectrum of progressive, experimental, and psychedelic music, delivering some truly unreal performances and soundscapes that were so effective that you wouldn't really need to take any kind of drug to feel trippy after hearing this. From start to finish, it just consistently delivers incredible arrangements. Take, for instance, the album's very opening, Void Monolith, a slow, buzzing, droning number that weirdly reminds me of the soundtrack to Mandy in its most psychedelic and deranged moments, but spiced up with flourishes of occult rock and post-rock to give it a little bit more meat, a little bit more grit. Or the crazed and even claustrophobic layers of following track, The Shamanic Vision, which in and of itself is quite a wild ride. Wailing vocals, flailing guitars, massive drum fills, it's like the most psychedelic version of the apocalypse you'll ever hear. This album probably has one of the most incredible closings I've ever heard as well, with dual tracks The Universal Eye and Syntheosis. Together, it's pretty much 18 minutes long, but it is nothing short of incredible. Across these 18 minutes, you'll hear synths, weird alien-like noises, electronic flourishes, massive, doomy, fuzz-coated guitars, and it all comes together so well, it flows so well, it pieces together quite organically, actually. And you can say that about the rest of the album as well. As atmospheric and crazy and psychedelic as it gets, it still flows incredibly well. There's very little fat to trim off this thing. However, since we're on the topic, that does bring me to one of my few criticisms. There is still fat nonetheless. One of the problems with experimental music in general is that it does tend to meander, and that's the vibe I did get occasionally on here. Most notably on Journey to the Center of Match, which tends to repeat a very unintuitive post-punk kind of rhythm. Granted, they build a lot on top of it, but it's still noticeable, and when I listen to this song, I can't help but think to myself, man, it would be great if they got to the fucking point already. I also don't care much for the vocals on this record. I'm not sure who specifically is doing vocals of the two bands, if it's all of them for that matter, but whoever it is, the main vocal approach on this record is to just kind of do this almost demon-like shriek into the microphone. It literally sounds as if someone's getting sick while they're recording the album. Now, there are brief moments where this adds some drama and intensity to the record, but most of the time it just kind of sounds like whoever's doing them just had an allergic reaction while the rest of the band was recording their bits, and they just forgot to edit it out. There's also kind of a story going on here about three figures known as the Shaman, the Seeker, and the Possessor, and I think this could have been expanded on a little bit more. It's left more to your own interpretation and imagination. The band says a ceremony ends up in the opening of a portal which sucks the three beings into an alien dimension, which is populated by brain-mutilating color storms and ego-diminishing audio violence. Eventually, the three are forced to reach equilibrium and melt their minds into one collective consciousness. Maybe this was more convincing to people at Roadburn because it had that visual component to it, but this is a point where I go back to what I said about the live DVD before, and I can't help but wonder why this wasn't a live DVD, or why there isn't some kind of visual component to go along with this. I want to point out, though, that that's not inherently a bad thing. I mean, this is psychedelic music. It's inherently left a lot to the imagination since its very inception. Just something that I noted and something that I think could be made more effective. Nonetheless, I'm giving this thing a 4 out of 5. This is one of the most interesting and engaging psychedelic records I've heard in a long time. Sometimes psychedelic music kind of falls into the same world as like a lot of prog music, where it just feels like we're being flashy for the sake of being flashy, and sometimes bands waste a lot of time and meander and they don't really do anything. But for the most part, that's not the case on Syntheosis. It is an incredibly well-crafted, well-layered, and meticulously arranged record. Even when it does fall victim to some of those cliches, I'm still invested enough that I want to see where things are going. Hell, I'm not gonna lie, this is one of the few psychedelic albums that I actually kind of want to hear on some kind of psychedelic. Maybe that would even open up the album even more to me. This is obviously not for a casual listener, but if you really love psychedelic and drone and experimental music and more progressive and avant-garde metal, then this is definitely something to keep an eye out for. It's a very engaging and diverse and unique listen. And I really hope this isn't a one-off collaboration. I think Waste of Space Orchestra are really on to something. I think they've accomplished something that no psychedelic band has frankly accomplished in an extremely long time, even despite my nitpicks and shortcomings, which I'd like to point out, in the grand scheme of things, are really just my personal nitpicks. 4 out of 5, so close to that 4.5 if we're being honest, but nonetheless, I still highly recommend it. I will still be looking for it on vinyl, and who knows, maybe if I do take some psychedelics and decide to listen to this, maybe it'll bump the score, and maybe you will see this on my top 10 at the end of the year. I can kind of feel it deep down. We'll see. We'll see. And that is it for the Metal Meltdown. I'm not an expert, nor do I claim to be, so what do you think? Do you like this record? Do you not like this record? And what do you want to hear from me next? Thank you for watching. Make sure you press subscribe so you get updates on Metal Meltdown fucking immediately, and you have yourself a fantastic fucking day.